So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us here for Actualizing Equity. My name is Ju He. I'm the Executive Director for Alliance, just offering a welcome on this Friday morning. And for those of you who are not so familiar with our work, Alliance is a coalition of community-based organizations and advocacy groups building shared power to advance strategic campaigns around the intersections of racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice, and health equity. And our mission is to advance justice and equity and economic growth and land development here in the Twin Cities. So for many years now, we've been convening the Actualizing Equity event series to create spaces for community organizers like yourselves and aligned stakeholders to build relationships, share knowledge, and strategize together in our work to change the policies and systems that influence racial, economic, environmental, and health equity in the region. And so today we are diving into a specific issue that we're going to take a step back to look at, and we're going to take a step back to take a look at the bigger picture. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused significant shifts in the way we organize and advocate for systems and policy change to protect our collective health while meeting the urgency of the moment. We've had to adjust our strategies and tactics to mobilize our communities and bring both new and longstanding demands to institutions of power. And so across the issue areas and geographies, the unrelenting certainty and peril has taken a toll on our bodies and spirits and relationships, and also has made space for new ideas that can take our movements that can make our movements more creative, inclusive, and accessible. So as we continue to navigate the ongoing pandemic, what challenges have we faced and opportunities have we embraced? I'm excited to hear from our speakers as they explore the topic today, and we'll hand it over to my colleague, Ricardo, who will be moderating. So thank you, everybody, and I'll throw it over to Ricardo.
Thanks, Yuhi. Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. I hope your day is going well. It's good to see all of you, and thank you for joining us today. Basically, we're gonna start and jump right into the reason why we're here, hearing from our great panelists. We're gonna go through 3 questions with 3 main topics around the issue that Yuhi described, and we're gonna follow just like a pattern responding. I'll tell you who goes first, and we'll take it from there. But yeah, with that being said, the first question is kind of like getting us all on the same page. So it's kind of like a grounding question. And the first question is, while so many of our leaders in government, philanthropy, and other institutions of power are intent to move on from COVID-19, we know our communities are still very much in the midst of the pandemic and its impact. So to all of you, how would you describe this moment for your organization, your community, and yourself? Are you feeling hopeful, exhausted, likely perhaps a complicated mix of those emotions? So wondering if you can share about that. You have up to 2 minutes, and perhaps we can start with our streets team, Jose or Alex. And sorry, would you maybe introduce yourself before you answer the question, and thank you.
I can go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Burns. Use he, him pronouns, Transportation Policy Coordinator at Our Streets Minneapolis. Good to be with you all. I think I'm feeling definitely that complicated mixture of both for sure. This has been an exhausting couple years, but I think we'll likely talk about this more, but also just really feeling hopeful and more determined than ever to focus on like the urgent need to achieve the outcomes that we're all striving for. So I think collectively we're all just pushing through it and just doing everything we can to move the work forward, and that's where I'm at.
Hi everyone, I'm Jose. I'm the Advocacy Director at Our Streets Minneapolis. It's nice to meet some of you for the first time. As far as the leadership and the different spaces and how that has intersected with the pandemic, my observation has been that the pandemic and the response to the pandemic has highlighted a lot of the things that were already systemic. And in unfortunate ways, made it even more clear what is it that has been missing and disimproved for a lot of the folks who are already struggling. While at the same time, I also believe that it has helped clarify for a lot of people what their personal priorities are. And there has been movements nationally and locally to move in the direction of reprioritizing for individuals and groups of individuals. And we feel very optimistic about being able to capitalize on that, sometimes animosity, sometimes energy, and sort of funnel it in the direction of fruitful outcomes because people seem to be more willing to take more risks on their own behalf and on the behalf of their community members.
Thank you, Jose. And just as an FYI, y'all can react or share on the chat as well. I'll be posting the questions in there. And thank you for that great responses. Hoping that maybe we can hear now from the team at West Coast. So Monica or Maisha, would you want to share perhaps a bit on the first question that we're kind of like addressing here? I can read it again if you want me to, but it's on the chat, just an FYI.
Sure. I think I really resonate a lot with what Jose has said, and Alex as well. But I was like reflecting on this question and thinking about, like, I'm definitely in the camp of complicated mix of emotions. Throughout this time, like holding both a mix of hope and also exhaustion, but ultimately clarity, right? Like this crisis has made it abundantly clear in the amount of suffering, in the division of those who have and who have not. In these times of crises, we know that the practices of exploiters, they rise while folks are busy trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent or feed themselves or meet their basic needs. And I still am holding on to hope, right? And know that history has shown us that in these times of crisis, that people can come together and we can make massive changes, right? Just like we just experienced with the strongest rent stabilization policy in the country in St. Paul. So right now, I would say that it is that mix of both like exhaustion, but also hope, and that there's clarity in the midst of all of this for me. Maisha, pass it to you.
And I actually would just piggyback off of you because I myself find myself, full of mixed emotions, because on one hand, we have hope, right? Knowing that we've seen and experienced in a collective and taking care of one another, but also knowing that in the middle of two pandemics, between the racial reckoning and the COVID pandemic, we were still able to get rent stabilization on the ballot. So that was a huge success to us and to all renters really in Minnesota. But then also, I guess just exhausted. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. I feel like with our elected officials, they think that the pandemic is over. The pandemic is totally not over. We still have renters in our community that, still need rent assistance. But yet all these programs, for the city and for the county, have been closed down, but there's people that still behind rent. And I don't think they think about the long-term effects of those. Even with that, the long-term physical effects of COVID. My daughter just recently had COVID, maybe about a month ago, and she still has like this cough that is a persistent cough, which triggers her asthma for her to have asthma attacks. So fortunately, I'm at a job that they're understanding when I need to take the time off, but not everybody has that luxury and not everybody has that resource. So I'm exhausted in just, I guess, the work that we've done, but then also trying to figure out ways that we can show up better in our community. So.
Thank you so much. No, it's very, very powerful. And I agree. I keep hearing people left and right are getting COVID still. And I'm like, I mean, why are we acting like we're not? And then last but not least, with the team at Homeline, you might want to step in and share with us your insights and thoughts. Kara?
Thanks, everybody. My sidekick, Uba, is not here today because she's really sick, unfortunately. I wish she was. But my name's Kara. I use she, her pronouns. I am the organizing project director at Homeline. And I'm like everyone else. It's complicated. I think one of the struggles, challenges the organizing team as a whole has is, I don't know if you have ever hurt yourself really badly, like broken a knee or an ankle or anything like that. And, you know, it's got a lot of swelling and everything. And so before you can even go into surgery, you have to ice it, and you have to get the swelling down and get the symptoms taken care of. And I think what we're realizing is that it's so hard to get to what we know is the solution to the problem, is the core and the root of it. We're just constantly icing this wound and icing because the things keep happening. And so I think some of the burnout comes in the fact that we can't get to the core before we take care of all of these symptoms that are happening. And it's a constant struggle because we never get those down enough. So I think one of the things around our organization that's been really great is this focus on mental health and wellness within the organization. If you need to take some time off, you know, we're lucky, like Maisha's organization as well. Our ED is great. If you need to take a day off, if you need a mental health day, so understanding of it. Our office manager keeps passing along things that we have free through our health partners insurance to take advantage of. We just found out we have access to life coaches and things like that, which I had no idea health partners had. But, you know, it does cause this thing of like, what can we do within our organizations? And so our team implemented a Friday wellness hour, which actually is going on right now for us. But it's just a Friday hour where everyone can go in and kick it and talk about their week, whether it was good or bad. And it's really a space to let that go before the weekend. So you can go and be really good for your friends and your family. But we also have tried to implement this thing that is being very honest about it and not doing the Minnesota passive aggressive thing where we're kind of pushing it to the side. We always have to be toxically happy and being able to say, hey, I had a really rough week this week. Like the calls I had were tough. And sometimes just allowing that space to be really honest has helped people a lot. I think from a community standpoint, I know it's been hard, more than exponentially hard for everyone. But I think the hope that I have in that is watching communities come together, because I think sometimes communities that experience oppression, the view is that it's, oh, these communities are so disadvantaged and they're so poor and all these things from a very saviorist Eurocentric view, when in reality, these are really rich communities. One of the things that they have is a very collectivist attitude, and they have these really strong, tight support systems. And that is building incredible community power right now, because they already have this. And so when we go in and we organize, we don't have to say, meet your neighbors and those things. They know the entire community. So I think there's a huge amount of power that is starting to be recognized and connecting those communities together to build the larger movements. Because I think as organizers, we all realize that real power and change is going to come from the grassroots level with the actual communities' voices being highlighted and leadership coming out of those communities first. So.
Awesome. Wow, that was very, very powerful. And yeah, I love how you just centered the fact that community is wise. And it's also really cool to hear how everyone's very aligned on this answer, you know, so it must be true 100%. So yeah, thank you. So we're gonna now move into our second question. And now that we've been grounded, this one's more about current barriers and shifts. So it's asking you the following. To protect our collective health while meeting the urgency of the moment, we had to adjust our strategies and tactics to mobilize our communities and bring both new and long-standing demands to institutions of power. How did the pandemic shift your work, or what steps do you take to make sure your campaigns were effective in this challenging moment? And we'll start with the same order on how we responded to the first question, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll be posting the questions on the chat. So, our streets.
You want to go first, Jose? I think he may be frozen. Oh, I can go. So I think, yeah, from in our street's perspective, when Jose and I both came on staff and started with like the Bring Back Six campaigns and Twin Cities Boulevard and all of our work, it was last year, so last summer. So it was all of our campaigns and all of our organizing has been built out of the context of the pandemic. And I think just a few things that come to mind in thinking about the way that we've been trying to organize during this time is just still to create places where community members can be informed about issues and be directly connected to the decision makers. And one example of that has been doing virtual public forums talking about specific issues. And I think that's something that we've kind of lost during this time is like when council meetings and other public decision maker meetings have been going online, they haven't always been super accessible. Like in some ways they have been more accessible, but in other ways we've lost that shared sense of community of getting community members in a room to talk about an issue and to advocate for outcomes. So we've been trying to recreate that by hosting these forums where we're inviting all the key decision makers and just creating a space where people can advocate, for the outcomes that they would like to see. And yeah, Jose, if you want to talk more maybe about like the upcoming forum that we have, but that's one example that comes to mind.
Yeah, so to pick it up where Alex left it, I think that's just right, which is that, like I was saying earlier, we found that people have lost faith in their representatives and the systems that are meant to protect them and look out for them, or some have never really been looked out for. And so we wanted to make sure that through information and awareness, and obviously doing our own work and putting in our expertise toward explaining feasibility and achievability, we bring forward these positive visions for people to engage with, and we attach them to steps that they can take, and making sure that things are done publicly and through public engagement. And that has proven to be very fruitful because, like Alex was saying, it just creates a direct connection to the decision makers with an understanding of the process itself and a feeling of empowerment that if they take these action steps, that they're going to see results. Because we're bringing them things that are actually plausible. We're explaining the policies to them, and making it seem really approachable. And also, I would say connecting it to the kitchen table issues. The question of how is this going to benefit me in my home or in my neighborhood or in my street, and what protections and precautions are you taking to make sure that it doesn't harm me further? We take the time to make sure those questions are answered. On Wednesday, May 4th, we're hosting our second Minnesota Department of Transportation Accountability Forum around restoring 6th Avenue North to replace Olson Memorial Highway. And that's a great example because we've done all of this research to uncover the 100-year history of Olson Memorial Highway while also campaigning for near-term outcomes and the long-term restoration of that avenue, so that it's clear through our research that that community was removed intentionally. It was removed intentionally because it was mostly Black American. There was a thriving economy living there that no longer exists. Drivers were prioritized. And now it's, one of the most polluted zip codes, or the most polluted zip code in the city. It doesn't serve folks who can't afford to own cars. It's a food desert. Getting around is very difficult. It's totally unsafe. And because of how we've done things, MnDOT has already committed to bringing immediate safety improvements and looking at returning the land. So in moving all of these things together, we're actually achieving these outcomes and creating momentum, and we'll be able to push agencies in the direction of hopefully completely returning that land and restoring what existed there to the benefit of the community. And so what I would say sort of tactically, the newness of what we're doing is taking all of these things and combining them and moving them together, but also adding like a deep emotional connection to the harms themselves, and making sure that community members are able to engage with them in a way that's super accessible. And we feel very strongly that if we continue to do the work that in the way that we're doing, we're going to achieve this goal of restoring that avenue and the economy that was once there.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you, Monica.
I don't know if you wanted me to wait or just go. Wow, Jose, that is amazing work. Just like high fives all around. I want to talk with you later. Similar situation, right? Like BIPOC community disrupted. Super powerful work. So I think for us, what we had to do was we learned that we needed to pivot our work and to hold both the larger, like systemic organizing work, but also the immediate need. And we don't typically do direct service work, but we found ourselves that you needed to pivot. And our community care work actually emerged and solidified out of this as well. So we found that we can show up for each other and redistribute resources in a spirit of abundance in the midst of this pandemic, right? We learned that tenants were not only uncertain about where their next rent check was going to come from, but they were also like, where's the food going to come from? And, we can't do either, let alone think about like a big systemic organizing push for rent stabilization in this moment. So we actually, in the height of the pandemic, found ourselves working through a mutual aid support for direct support. And we organized, over $60,000 for our Westside families on tenant relief checks that those renters may not have otherwise qualified for with the federal dollars initially. We also ended up, organizing mutual aid food banks that were, we fed over 500 families in our neighborhood. This is not work that we do, but it caused us to have to pivot in ways that we hadn't had to pivot before. But we also were able to hold on to that larger vision. And by meeting each other's needs, by developing those deeper relationships in those moments of crisis, we were also able to say, okay, now let's move together down this path, right? And we did, a lot of creative outreach, very creative things to stay visible and keep moving forward. And I'll let Maisha talk a little bit about that. She ran some of our ground game campaigns. So go ahead, Maisha.
So I kind of want to start off by saying we had to find a way to raise funds to provide Wi-Fi, laptops, and training to some of the tenant leaders for them to be able to participate in Zoom. We also had staff members help conduct trainings, Zoom trainings, and just being computer literate, so they would be able to join the trainings. I would say we had a signature collection box for when we did go out to do door knockings, and just early on we had people that used their own pens. We had a box for our clean and dirty pens. We still practice social distancing at the doors. We still used our PPE. I would say in all honesty, we just held on to and moved into a longer term systemic change. Just visualizing what rent stabilization and what that would look like. So even with that being said, when we were going through the campaign, we had training sessions, small training sessions. We had small training sessions at our hubs with the sign that you seen Monica holding up, to help people keep in mind to practice social distance while we were inside. We had PPE also as well while we were inside. So there, I think for the most part, we did pretty good, especially with the changes that happened. I think we did really, really awesome. And I'm definitely proud of the work that Wesco has done. I mean, even now we're still doing virtual forums. So, I mean, in the beginning, it didn't start off, so well. You have that slow start, but gradually people start coming on and it starts increasing. So, yeah, that's about it.
I was holding up I was holding up a plaque, kind of like my words are failing me right now, the laminated virtual social distance door knock. So people would knock on the door, hold out the sign and be like, social distance door knock, can we talk? And so, yeah, we tried all kinds of things.
So I totally am going to echo the last thing that Maisha talked about, which was using technology to get to more people within webinars and things like that. I know Homeline organizing team, and we grew this year, which is really exciting. But there just wasn't a lot of technology because we do boots on the ground and we do one-to-ones and we want to meet the community directly. But when you can't do that, what do we do? And so turned into a really incredible series of webinars. And, I look back at the first one and I was like, oh, wow, this did start at the pandemic. And now we have about 20, and for different situations and different properties and, different demographics. And what we realized is it gave us an opportunity to duplicate ourselves, because the other thing that we have at Homeline is an intake database where we get anywhere from 100 to 300 calls a day. And we get the organizing team gets tagged in ones that the intake individuals feel like could be an organizing opportunity. And those used to, trickle in like 1 or 2, maybe a week. And I mean, some weeks we're up to like 6 and 7. And it really highlighted that we had to figure out a way to make ourselves a team of 4 into a team of 12. So what are the written resources that we are giving out for trainings? What are the video resources that we could do? But how do we maximize our ability? Because we only have so much time and energy. And so how do we be more efficient? How do we be more effective? Technology was a huge one for us. And so even just tapping, because we're organizers, like we don't use that stuff, but tapping into QR codes on posters so that when someone walks by it, they go, oh, and they click it and they sign up for your webinar instead of looking at it. And then the day that it happened, they go, oh, shoot, I forgot it. So just little things like that. And especially with technology and QR codes are everywhere. So we're so used to it now. Before it was maybe a weird thing. Everyone sees it and they scan something. So that I think helped us kind of turn the corner on how we're looking at those things. The other thing that we really realized was going to be absolutely critical was collaborating with the neighborhood organizations or organizing groups that are geographically located in that area. If we have to organize up in Maple Grove, the office is in Bloomington, I mean, that's a long way every time. Or if it's on the east side and it's a 30-minute drive. So finding the neighborhood orgs that we can support through resources is really, really the way that we feel like organizing is almost best done for us. We helped start the campaign and the movement, but ultimately that neighborhood organization or organizing group is going to be the one that runs point on it because they know more about what's happening in the area. I organized at my property a long time ago and I knew what was going on every single day, so if an organization was going to come in and lead that, they wouldn't have known what was really happening. And so finding those local representatives and tenant leaders that actually are in that area. The other thing that we just took a look at too, and this is the downside of it for us, is we had so many calls and so much need, as every organization does. We started to have to kind of do the playing God on who gets an organ. And we said we can either help 20 communities kind of okay, we can help 15 moderately, or we can help 10 really, really well. And there are just some situations where we have to decide who has the most need. And we, have to assess that by, by a lot of things. One of our big ones is the resources that people have. Do they have technology? Is English a second language? Is it a low income property? Just all those types of things that for our risk assessment would put them at a higher need versus a property that maybe it was a market rate property and they have, all the technology they need, and we can find tenant leaders that can flyer and do that stuff on their own because, all we have to do is pass them a couple websites and some resources to train themselves. But where do we need to step in and really assist a community in the beginning with a heavier lift? And how do we pick those? And it's not fun. There's just times that we want to help everyone, but we also know it is critical right now for us to not go in and poorly help a community. We're actually doing them more harm than if we hadn't helped at all. We give them hope. We're not there to consistently help them. And so we really have to watch those things. And Erin West, our lead tenant organizer, is really incredible at getting us to think about those kind of things. So we are doing the best for what's good for the community, not us that we're like, oh, we need to help them. What's good for them. So yeah, I would say that was a huge thing that shifted for us. And then just how do we get to the communities? Again, everyone's talking about one-to-ones and being face-to-face, but how do you do that? Connecting properties together with us. Signal is something that we, suggest people use a lot. And it really helps. It connects them together. It doesn't matter if the argument's iPhone or Android, it works for everybody. Texting, things like that, I feel like have become much more prevalent in my organizing because it's easier. People can get to me quicker. That may not have been something that I was doing a lot of before and, been like, just email me. Well, some of it needs to be happening a little bit quicker. So I do think that is some of the shifts, but we're excited to collaborate with more organizations because there's some real power that's being built through the understanding that one org cannot do it all on their own. And we're being forced to go, okay, so we don't have this resource, but Wisco has this resource. We don't have this one, but our streets has that. So how do we all kind of fill in and implement what we're strong at to really help a community build a bigger movement?
Awesome. No, that was super, super cool. And yeah, as you were talking, was resonating a lot, or just wondering on the system that sometimes we're standing against, or something that has endless resources apparently. So yeah, thank you for sharing. So this last and third question, it's about after we talked about some of the barriers, what kind of vision and looking ahead do we have going on? So the third question is asking you the following. While the pandemic revealed in even more stark relief the injustices communities of color face across so many systems, it also showed that another paradigm is possible. For instance, we lived in a state with no evictions for nearly 2 years. What are the new or exciting pathways or ideas you're seeing in organizing right now? So I'll be putting the question on the chat, and if our streets want to take it away to start with. Thank you.
I can start again. So yeah, I think this is a really good question, and that has been one of the positive things that I've noticed for sure in these last 2 years, is that I think collectively people are expanding our imaginations to imagine a better world, and one that like truly meets the level of need that there is in our communities. And I like, from both the Bring Back 6 and the like Rethinking I-94, Twin Cities Boulevard campaigns, we've been those campaigns are taking on something like urban highways that have really been the status quo for the last 50, 60 years. And I think are something that, for a lot of people, when we talk about what we're trying to do, sometimes we get some strange looks because like that is just something that has always been assumed to be there. But when it's reframed in terms of, okay, should we live with elevated rates of asthma in our communities and and high levels of air pollution? Should we be accepting that a quarter of community members don't have transportation access to access their daily needs? Should we continue to perpetuate this climate crisis when transportation is the biggest source of those emissions? And on and on. Like, what is it going to take to achieve a future where those things aren't the case? And let's set that as the standard and work backwards to build infrastructure that addresses that, because that can absolutely be done, especially now. Like the Minnesota Department of Transportation has more money than it has ever had due to the federal infrastructure bill. And there's examples in cities across the country and across the world where highways have been removed and the land has been returned to the community. So why can't Minneapolis and St. Paul set the standard for what that could look like? So I think just telling people like on the doors, like letting people know that is possible, empowering them with that information. And then, as we were talking about before, connecting them with the decision makers to demand that and to set that expectation has been super powerful. And I think, that's where we need to be in this moment, just like organizing for the outcomes that we want to see. And so that's what we're focused on with these campaigns.
I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, Alex did a great job there. I feel like just to reinforce a few things, I think culturally, especially when we're talking about communities of color or immigrant communities, we probably come from places where we are a little bit more comfortable with being disruptive. And part of culture is that kind of understand the value of that kind of engagement with leadership or elected officials. And so one exciting thing that I see is sort of in that category is normalizing disruption as part of a way of communicating with folks. If you're not getting the things that you need and your needs aren't met, that it's okay to have that kind of conversation, through collective power and engagement, and bringing those concerns forward in a way that's loud enough that you're actually getting a response, as long as it's focused on outcomes, because the people that we're addressing are public servants, and their job and their primary responsibility is to respond to the public and fund it, in a material way so that they benefit. And I think to kind of also build on another great point that Alex was making, in terms of expanding imagination, is sort of making this vision for what a community could be a permanent fixture within the communities so that these movements are self-perpetuating, and so one of the things that we're doing ahead of these forums is a mobile museum with the history of this highway. People are going to come out and engage with what it was like, so that this emotional connection and response to it also turns into an expectation that they can have for the next person who's on the ballot or trying to run for office, or for the next staff person who's making decisions about what their neighborhood's going to look like. And the other thing I would say, specifically to the point in the question about the state with no evictions for 2 years, I also feel like it's also to uninvisibilize the folks who were invisibilized during this process, and then make sure that they're more prominent. A lot of the discussions that we have often are from the point of view of able-bodied people. When we make changes in transportation, it has a serious impact on people who are disabled and disabilities of spectrum. And I make that as an example because with communities of color, especially across the economic spectrum, I think we are also seeing an exciting opportunity to flip the script on how progress is handed to community members and saying, look, if we make something that accommodates the most vulnerable, everyone can benefit from it. And what we're saying in our advocacy is that you need to start with the most vulnerable person. And then, if you have a street grid or a reconstructed neighborhood or a transit system that serves the most vulnerable people, able-bodied people can use it. Wealthy people can use it too and benefit from it. No problem whatsoever. And so I have seen this as an opportunity to flip the script on this sort of trickle-down concept and saying, let's do it bottom up. Let's feature and invisibilize these people, not just so that they're highlighted, but also the policy benchmarks and the investment that's made starts with them first. And then everybody else is going to be able to fit within that framework.
Thank you. And Monica, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say that, it seems like we're holding both. It's exciting because we're holding both like the possible and the impossible at the same time, right? And we know that the world can and should change. And that it right now is that time of change, even though we're in the midst of this crisis and the pandemics. I think right now really, like, it's an exciting time because we're in this place where, things have been uncovered for a lot of folks who maybe weren't paying attention. And there's this time I feel like we're in where we're no longer going to accept the conditions as they have been. And that subpar living conditions, unfair wages, mass incarcerations and mass deportations, we're demanding aggressively life-affirming public safety, and this like slow genocide of oppressed people, I think, is coming to an end. And we have to build our dreams together, and it's going to take us failing sometimes, feeling that really closely right now, but also getting back up again, and taking time for us to rest and to take risks. And it's going to take accountability and radical solidarity as we reimagine together, what our world can and will be. So I am hopeful in this moment, but I'm going to let Maisha share a little bit more.
So I just want to start off by saying, we took a risk, right, with the rent stabilization. So we know a new way is possible. We've experienced it. We watched it played out in the pandemic, and we won. Like we showed up, we turned out, and we won. We witnessed, especially on the West Side, traditionally, we don't have the greatest voter turnout, but we turned out at every precinct, we turned out and we let them know we mean business from our elected officials. I will say, I feel like Minnesota, St. Paul set the standard. We had the strongest rent stabilization policy and voter turnout in the country ever. So that's huge. So we know these things are possible. We know we can create change. And I feel like if we keep this momentum up, there's no telling what we can do. Literally, the sky is the limit. We've learned, our communities are strong, right? And it doesn't matter which community you come from. We've learned that all our communities are strong, and especially when we're working together and we have each other. So we showed up, we survived the times in crisis, and we're still in times of crises, but we're surviving. And not only are we surviving, we're getting to the point where we're thriving, but everybody has to thrive. So with all that being said, I feel like with Westco, we're clear, we're more grounded in our vision, values, and human dignity. Our goals for the West Side is, you know, to have a vision for collective ownership for housing models, you know, for our renters. This housing crisis that we have right now is definitely not getting any better. And we hear people all the time say, like, there's jobs out there, you know, on TV. They're always talking about, you know, well, the so-and-so said, like, you know, Minnesota released like 300 jobs, and there's 300 jobs, 800 more jobs out there. But if that is the case, why do we still have people struggling economically? It can't be that everybody don't want to go to work. So.
So I think one of the things, and, you know, it comes back to speaking about evictions and what we're seeing. And, you know, it's scary right now. And, you know, the eviction protections are going away in June, which is horrifying considering the amount of evictions we're already seeing happening now and being filed from 75 to over 100 daily. And then thinking about June, what's going to come ahead. But one of the things that we've really, I mean, we always knew this, but the importance of it is so great right now, is renters getting education. Renters' rights are hard to find for a reason. And the power imbalance between tenants and landlords, you know, some people are, oh, it's like a 60-40. It's not even close to that. It's like a 90-10. And, you know, for us, we realized that our capacity has to grow. And to be able to do that, we hired 6 new student attorneys for the summer. So super excited to have more capacity. But within that, I think the thing we've realized overall is that it's about leadership empowerment. It's about community empowerment, but it's not about going into communities and, you know, doing this training generally. It's about identifying the individual leaders in the community that you can train with these skills. You can train with higher level of an understanding of landlord tenant law, because that person is then going to go and influence 5 other people. And those 5 people in the community are then going to go and influence 5 others. And I think that's one of the things that I love the most about the shift, is looking at how do you empower this one person and what kind of opportunities are they getting? I'm really excited because we've had 2 tenant leaders now that are going to, one already finished and one's going into, oh no, 2 already finished, neighborhoods now with Kira, which is, I was in there with Maisha. We got, you know, we did the leadership training together, and it's one of the best organizing trainings I think you can get. But to have 2 tenant leaders that came out of the community that were speaking up for the property, then having them take this, that's power. And they're going to go do something with this. And this is a person that was not or did not feel empowered before. And I would say 80% of why they didn't feel empowered is because they didn't have the knowledge. They didn't feel like they could be in those spaces. You know, I don't know enough. Like, how would I go to city council? And so training them to do those things is going to overall influence a huge amount of people in the community that they're involved in. You know, I think the other thing that's exciting about organizing personally for me is we kind of got back to grassroots of it, just like really basics of individual relationships are so important. And COVID forced us to slow down. And what that did was give us more time. Like, everybody reassessed and was like, what do I really want to do? I don't want to be in this job anymore. I don't want to live my life like this. I don't want to be at work 80 hours a week. And so it shifted that because what we don't give people is time, because no one has time. But the number one thing that creates a stronger bond and relationships is giving somebody your time. Like, sometimes I get asked when I come back and I work with other organizers, how did you get that phone number? How did you get that information from that person? And I was like, well, after the organizing event, instead of just packing up and kicking out of there, we just hung out. You know, it was another hour after the meeting that we hung out with people, but that's where the relationship was built. It wasn't actually in the hour meeting. It was afterwards, because we said, we're not going to just pack up and leave. However long people stay, that's how long we're going to stay. At a meeting 2 weeks ago, I ended up getting the mayor's cell phone number from one of the people that's involved in community. And, you know, how did that happen? Because we just stayed around and we gave people our time and our energy. But I think also with the pandemic, that's what people are missing out on as well, because we're so isolated. So I'm excited about community organizing because people want to engage. They're like, I'm so excited somebody's here talking to me. And it may have been the first time they've ever had someone listen to them and had a voice. And I think that's really exciting too, that all these organizations are reaching out more, trying to meet the community where they're at. And it's just those little bits of time that make people feel really special and make them want to get involved in the community as well. So I'm excited for the shift of community empowerment, leadership empowerment, and from an organizer's perspective of looking at it as training individuals to actually spread the power.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. That was really, really great. And this also means that we're kind of like completed this portion of the event where we have these questions. And next, we're kind of like not improvising, but adapting to this morning by not really having breakout rooms where it will be just a couple of us in one room. And we're going to kind of like invite the room as it is right now to think of questions and stuff that we can, talk with our panelists about as you heard some of this wonderful information. And we do have one question already. So as you're hearing to this next conversation, if you come up with any questions, please drop them in the chat. And perhaps, I can read the question, but if Andrea, do you want to maybe read your question to the panelists so it comes directly from the source?
Oh, sure, I can. I don't mind.
Cool.
I was just, thinking while you were speaking about specifically targeting your interventions towards folks with disabilities. I was curious to hear how you're planning on adapting your organizing to the significant increase in disability we can expect due to long COVID, which is affecting up to 30% of people who have caught COVID, which is a lot. So just curious for your perspective on what does organizing look like in a world with ongoing illness in a really sizable portion of the population, and what tools, tactics, and strategies do you think are going to become more important and relevant?
Thank you, Andrea. And I'll invite the panelists to unmute yourself and tackle the question. So does anyone have any immediate responses to Andrea's question?
I think looking at the accessibility of things from a technological standpoint and a geographical standpoint. So, does the community have access to technology, and what kind? A lot of people have cell phones. Most people have cell phones. So while they may not have a computer and they may not have internet sometimes, cell phones, most people have those. So using things like Signal, using things like email, because they can access that on their phone, is just something to take a look at that can make it easier, or just whatever, group chat. There's so many apps right now, that you can use to help out with that. I also think, especially, and thank you for asking about disabilities, for physical disabilities, I think it's important to take a look at where you're hosting meetings, and accessibility for cars and things like that. I mean, we're trying to include everybody. So if your location can be on site for organizing events, it's fantastic. If it can't be, try to get it as close as possible. I mean, a mile away is easy. 2 miles away is easy. You get into 8 and 10 miles, so it's so less accessible for people for a multitude of reasons. And we know too, gas prices and, all these things. So, I think just taking a look at that as organizers. I love that Maisha talked about the laptops and things like that. We at Homeline have talked about using some of our tech funds for tablets, buying like 10 tablets and then giving them to the community's members that can't make it to the meeting. Just letting them borrow them for the meeting, then coming back and picking up later, giving them to the next community to use. But, we've had to think of some creative things like that as well. And then again, you run into the internet thing. you know, so a lot of times our default that we talked about is how many things can we get on the phone, can we do on the phone, since more people have those.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts on Andrea's question on the new normal, so to call it, on this situation? Monica, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, right, like thinking again about what is this immediate need and this larger picture, and how do we hold both at the same time? And I think that's, again, where I shared the community care aspect has really emerged. And so with that, you know, some of the things that are happening specifically are around contacting with mental health providers and services, and making sure that we have those resources and accessibility available. And that's something that the community care team has been like laser focused on right now. And what are the other ways that the community actually needs support or sustenance to even begin to think about, you know, how I can systemically go after something when I'm really worried about like how I'm going to have milk and bread on the table, and also like my, you know, child is self-harming right now. And so like, how do we work with people where they're at? And it's about meeting those needs in the moment. Not that we can be everything to all people, but we can connect to resources and be very cognizant of where people are at, and slowing down to work at the ability where we can all trust each other, right, as we move forward. And so being mindful of each other's humanness and of the human dignity that, you know, we all need to advance together. So I think of one family that we've been connecting to. They don't speak much English. They're having a hard time like accessing services, facing eviction, and the provider has long-term COVID effects where they were actually in a coma, and right now can't really see very well. And so but they have a very, very like passionate and powerful story and desire to be involved in this work. So it means like slowing down so that we can actually sit and work through what we need to work through with this family. And those are the pieces. So we too, in the moment, have grown. So we've been able to hire new staff, and it's going to take building that capacity, I think, also internally to meet the needs where we're at.
Thank you, Monica. No, that's great. I see perhaps one or two more questions on the chat, but before we move into the next ones, Jose or Alex, do you want to add anything to what's being said on the question about these ongoing emergencies or pandemics in organizing?
Yeah, I know we're kind of talking about disability and accessibility. Just to make a few examples of things that we're getting into, a lot of our advocacy obviously revolves around changing the way, changing the right of way, what a road looks like, what a street looks like, what a highway looks like. And the things that we are doing now is sort of accounting for what happens when those changes come, because anytime you change the look of a street, it can invite development. And that could lead to harmful things, or it could lead to positive things. And so we have done a lot of work with partners in housing and land use and in disability to create a set of benchmarks. I know some folks here with the Blue Line Coalition that does the same thing around that initiative. And specifically, a few examples from transportation perspective is the use of what's called universal design, which is a way of laying out streets that is completely inclusive of cognitive or developmental intellectual disabilities and also physical disabilities. It provides a lot more flexibility for folks who, for example, need to isolate if they have sensory issues, people who are impaired, that are blind or hearing impaired, so make sure that they're able to wayfind through the streets just as well. And obviously things like lighting and sound mitigation, different textures, And again, to the point that I was making earlier, it's beneficial to all, and it's pretty exemplary of how we approach policy benchmarks, which is that they ought to be universal. So whether it's TOPA or rent control or right to cure, things like that, we advocate for, they should be universal. And within that, we also make sure that the policies that we're advocating for lead to material benefits. Something that we talk about a lot is that people are not just to be represented in discourse, but they should be represented in economic impacts. And so when we're talking about labor opportunities, business development opportunities, and also community engagement from the agencies that are responsible for making these changes, that people with disabilities are represented in the conversation. They directly benefit from the economic impacts that come to the changes. And they're also represented in the labor force that's hired to make these changes, or the labor force that eventually emerges from reconstruction and restoration of a corridor. And so, we feel very strongly about that. And so we just try to make a very intentional effort to make sure that across the board, we're advocating for those members of the community. And to Monica's point, which also I think is really important, is to recognize intersections in the community. So for example, when we're talking about land trusts and commercial land trusts, folks who don't have licenses, we advocate for them to have municipal identification so that they can also benefit from having access to capital to develop their own business and business interests as well. And they also have easy access to all of the other benefits that come from and protections that come from having some kind of an ID and being obviously a participating member of the community. So that was a lot, but I think that's a good way to answer the question, is that we feel that people should be represented concretely through economic benefits as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose. That's great. I don't know if everyone has had a chance to kind of like tackle that question we're discussing currently. Am I missing someone? Cool. All right. Great. So I see another question in the chat. Will, would you want to like tackle it concretely, like the question that you have for the panelists there, or should I read it? Would you want to read it yourself?
Ricardo, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is it the one from WPC?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was you. My bad. I got confused. Cool.
No problem.
Oh, yeah. I don't know your name, but thank you. What's your name, sir?
That's okay. My name's Thomas, and I'm with the Wyndham Park neighborhood. We technically call ourselves the WPCIA, Citizens in Action. It's a mouthful. I just, first of all, I'm a new staff person here and trying to really diversify our engagement, and I appreciate the conversation, appreciate the commentary from a lot of our panelists. One thing that I want to kind of personally bring to the work that our organization does is just an increased awareness around mental health advocacy throughout our community and throughout our cities and regions. I feel like it's really kind of this duality of understood well that we're all in communities of crisis with mental health, but also strangely kind of just an undercurrent of complacency that there's less that can be done perhaps. So I'm looking specifically at schools, at our communities, and more individually in our households, that there's a lot of crisis that is kind of an undercurrent of our daily life. And I'm curious if panelists have thoughts on where there are current activities that can be supported, or where there are areas alternatively that could be places that can be initiated for kind of communal advocacy Are there places that we can kind of collectively talk about this for collective change? Sorry, that's kind of a long-winded question, but I'd appreciate your insight.
Sorry, I'm going to go first on this one. This one's really near and dear to my heart. I'm in grad school for clinical mental health counseling. And one of the challenges that I'm sure that you're seeing right now is there is just an extreme shortage. The counseling field in the next 2 years is projected to go up, job opportunities 29%. So if anyone wants to go get your license, it's a great time to do it because the jobs are not going to go away. I think one of the things that's a challenge is that there is a shortage. I don't know if you've tried to get into your own personal therapist before, counselors. I have one, she's great. It took me 6 months to get into her. Some of the waiting lists are even longer than that. And that's not unusual. That is pretty typical right now. So from an individual standpoint, I think researching and knowing the organizations that do sliding scale fees or are free for these communities. There is one that is similar to the Volunteer Lawyers Network where VLN, they're all volunteers for the lawyers. You can call them, it is income based, but they also have 2 of those in Minneapolis. And again, I think they have about 140 right now, but they rotate and you can go in, it's a walk-in clinic too. So you can go in anytime. You can get, maybe you are in crisis in that moment, or maybe, you just need to talk to someone about some of the things that have happened and it's not that serious, but just knowing some of those resources to hand out at a community level. I think one of the things, and with school too, a little, there's just not enough school counselors again. There never has been. I think that's the thing. There's never been enough. So there's that one's a harder tackle because the school also dictates how many they can hire and what can happen in their programs. But from a community level, I think there's some opportunities to do things that aren't necessarily bringing counselors in, but bringing activities in. So one of our organizers works with a community that she organized originally around rent problems, but found out there's a lot of moms, lots of kids. And so then the conversation turned into, well, hey, what do the kids need? What would you need as a parent? And they're like, we just need more activities, like things for the kids to get together and just have fun. And so that turned into them planning events for the kids, which is like super exciting. And she has now organized a bunch of things where an organization in Brooklyn Center literally came down and brought like 25 bikes for the kids. And so all the kids now are excited to have bikes for summer and spring. And, so there's these things that are happening that are automatically going to increase better mental health and socialization that wasn't specifically a therapist or a counselor, but it's going to create some of those connections. And within that, I think there's going to be some things that they find out. Some kids have more needs than others. But I think in organizations as well, like in your own organization, figuring out how do you make space for wellness hours? How do you make space for self-care? Even if it's, it might be somebody's on a bigger project. So guess what they get? They get one paid day that they can take off, but they're still going to get paid for that. That doesn't have to be them taking a vacation day. So I think there's some things we have to think of creatively, like what makes people happy, like what satisfies your soul, because things like that can help when we don't have access to an actual counselor therapist. The other thing is looking at all the online ones. Now I know those aren't perfect, and there's some things about those that I definitely think is a con because of the experience, because a lot of people are just like adding themselves into it. But I've had a lot of friends that have done BetterHelp and some things like that. And again, that's a sliding scale. So you put in your income and then they decide how much they're going to charge or pay. And then just making sure that people know if they have insurance, that they have the 800 number to call to know what that would be, how much it would be. And then also through health partners, for example, actually the card's sitting here, it's an 800. A lot of hospitals have the 800 number of call before you go. So you know what your copay or your cost would be. So I think that helps people too, because they're afraid, like, oh my gosh, it's going to be $400. But they call and they're like, $25? I can go today. So, and I think there's some just, again, it's the bureaucratic barriers of knowing what the systems and the processes are as well.
I see you're unmuted.
I would just say, no, I was just like super inspired by everything Kara is saying, and totally I'm like agreeing with all of it. And then also, so we do a little bit of that, like just organizationally, internally, as far as like the work plan. It's about what is your self-care plan and how is that, how are you, and we check in on it. Like, this is the goal. Have you met it? Do you have, what is it? Right. So making that like a point. And then also, in coalition is what I wanted to say, is that, you know, we're lucky and, well, you know, it's our blessing and our burden. We're isolated from the rest of the city, so it makes us a really tight community. And so with that, like, we reach out to like the institutional kind of anchor partners in our neighborhood. So building that network, that coalition within your neighborhood to say like, oh, over here at the Wellstone Center, they're going to take walks, and the whole community can get together and walk. So we also live in the River Valley, and we're, you know, have a lot of beautiful topography and trails and things like that. I mean, we also shoulder disproportionate burden of like the industrial uses of the city of St. Paul right here in our neighborhood too, and like have those asthma communities. So we have a health and environmental justice committee in our work, and that committee does do the planning of like, let's get back out into nature, let's recreation as resistance. That's like something that we actually do. So these types of alternative ways to think about creating spaces outside of the structure that, like, which we've heard, like we all know that you have to wait, or you're gonna have to push really hard just to get, like, you know, God forbid if it's a crisis, but just to get in. So what are the other ways that we create space and hold space as community? And then also, how do we partner with each other? Because just as we spoke to earlier in this discussion, we're not going to be able to do these things alone. This has to be done in coalition, in partnership, together, interconnected.
Thank you.
I can speak briefly about, I think it's a really good question, Thomas, in regards to transportation and the things that we're working on. In general, I think, you know, we are pushing on viewing transportation and things like public transit as a public service and not a commodity. And that includes things like, for the Twin Cities Boulevard vision, we are asking that new rapid transit service in that corridor, in the I-94 corridor, is zero fare or fare free. And that is important for a few reasons, of course, like the obvious, like reducing cost burdens to basic transportation amenities and access, but also for rethinking and removing fare enforcement, which is done currently by police officers and is and you know, removing police and transit or fare enforcement from our transit system. And I think that what's so critical in that conversation is recentering, like focusing on addressing folks' mental health issues that they're experiencing while they're on public transit, and providing the resources to meet their needs. And right now, that's just not the case. Public transit is a space where a lot of folks end up either just to seek shelter, or, you know, they're in a variety of different spaces in their life. And I think instead of penalizing people for not paying their fare, or for not being able to, or for being in that situation, projects like the Twin Cities Boulevard are opportunities to rethink that. How do we provide mental health responders to meet folks that are just having a tough time on the train, to connect them to basic services, and do it in a way that's not punitive, that's not sticking them with fines that they're not going to be able to afford to pay. And that is just meeting their basic needs and making sure that everyone is comfortable while they're on public transit. And there's examples of other cities, like San Francisco has moved more towards like what they call a transit ambassador model, where it is more about like, being an ambassador of the system, like helping people as opposed to just punishing them and kicking them off the train or the bus. And we feel like every opportunity, like every project, like Bring Back Six, like the Twin Cities Boulevard, is an opportunity to move more towards that system. Because like mental health crisis is something that we see in our transportation system every day.
Thank you.
Cool. How about anyone else want to add into this question that we have going on? Cool. If none, then yeah, so it's 12:21. We're scheduled until 12:30. I don't know if y'all have another question that you want to tackle before we kind of like wrap up the meeting. So perhaps we'll wait 30 seconds in silence just to make room for anyone that has any pressing questions or comments to finish with. I do see Monica has another message in the chat, which makes a lot of sense, and invite you to check it out for sure. So yeah, let's put 30 seconds here just to allow for these last emotions to come out if needed. Cool. Well, I personally feel that we're in a good place to stop, take a moment. It's like, who would have thought we were going to be here a couple of years ago talking about how we're rocking and surviving the pandemic and doing organizing work on top of everything. And it just really reminds me how powerful and resilient human beings are, that we truly do can swim against the current like fish, and that we look good while we do it as well. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here today. It's been a great conversation. Thank you to our panelists for your time and your wisdom, and thank you for your questions. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and a wonderful weekend. And remember, April showers, May flowers. That's the hope, at least. Take care and see you later.